So at this point, this is kind of my favorite point. I know we're towards the end here, but this is my favorite point of the Empower workshops that we do, because although we did, of course, hear from a patient, from Yellick himself, we love to engage a patient and their care partner. You know, sometimes you'll hear us use the word caregiver and care partner, and different people resonate with different words. I like the phrase care partner because it tells us that individual is partnering with the patient. So I'm going to ask Nicole Johnson and Yvonne Eddington to make their way up here. Yellick is going to help you up those stairs that are a little bit narrow there, but I want to have a little chat with them about myeloma. All right, and I'm going to make my Oprah move here and come and sit. You know, we've been talking today about the impact of myeloma on individuals and on communities. But I want you to share with us, Nicole, a little bit of its impact on you as an individual. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate being here. This is my first national stage. Thank you to Empower, IMF, and especially Nurse Becky, who recommended me to even come here. So,
there's only 2 million people watching, so no pressure whatsoever.
And thank you to my mom, who is my caregiver. I know. Thank you. So my myeloma has impacted me, and I actually, if you don't mind, if I can start my story, my journey, my testimony. So 4.5 years ago, I had severe pain in my side. I went to the hospital. Well, no, the doctors didn't really believe me. They, see this doctor, see that doctor. So come to find out, I had a mass in my colon. So I had colon cancer. I had to have a resection. And because of that, that started my journey with oncologists. And I was seeing an oncologist who was, treating me for the colon cancer. And he was doing all the tests you say you're supposed to do, checking for protein. And it came back that my protein was high. But my doctor did not say, hey, let's look at something else. It was honestly my insurance company sent me a letter and said, Nicole, I think you need to have someone check your protein again. And because of that led to my myeloma journey. So the colon cancer was 4.5 years ago, and then 1 year later, 3.5 years ago, the diagnosis for multiple myeloma. And so that first doctor said, I think it's probably MGUS, probably. But I am not the type to go, okay, whatever you say, it's all right. So I took it to the next step. I like to say, know your circle, find your circle. My circle included my family. It also included my doctors, friends. I have some friends who are oncologists, and they said, you know what, let's go see a specialist. So that's where my myeloma specialist journey, and at University of Maryland, so I'm born and raised in Baltimore, I currently live in Champaign, Illinois. I told Dr. Joe, if I'm too long-winded, just move me along. So I do appreciate everyone listening to me. And so I started treatment in February of 2020. Pandemic hit. I was supposed to have my transplant in June of 2020. That got pushed back. It literally got pushed back to December of 2020. I started a new job in May of 2020. I moved to Illinois in August of 2020. So I'm literally going back and forth, did not want to change my doctor. I had a local oncologist in Illinois, but I wanted my transplant team, Dr. Badros, and University of Maryland to do my transplant. So I would literally drive back and forth 11 hours one way. I would have family members fly in, drive with me, drive me back, and fly back home. So I did the whole gamut for several months until I had my transplant in December 2020. So, all right, now, long story short.
All good. It's good.
So myeloma has impacted my life. One other little caveat, I do have two little kids, currently a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old. So starting back in 7-year-old and a 9-year-old when I was diagnosed. And I had to live for them because I needed to see them grow up. So that was the main push. So I had to do what I had to do. And that's where my mom came in. She did what she had to do. Now I'll let her talk in a little bit. I know, I'm monopolized the whole time.
It's all good.
So I had to do it, and I wanted to do it. And so far, I've been very successful. I did the 3-drug treatment, followed by the transplant, followed by maintenance of Revlimid for a couple of years. And because my counts were a little wonky, my white blood cells, a little wonky, they took me off the Revlimid, and I said, so Dr. Badros, I love him. He said, Nicole, you are in Illinois. Find an Illinois myeloma specialist. I said, okay. So I finally took that leap, and I found Dr. Derman at University of Chicago. And he has been doing my care in conjunction with my local oncologist. And I love, love, love my local oncologist. I mean, she hugs me every time she sees me.
Love it.
And Dr. Derman has been fabulous. So I had an MRD, minimal residual disease test, and that was back in January, this past January, and that came back with 0 cells. So far, so good. God is good.
That's fantastic. I mean, it speaks to the team concept we've been talking about today. Advocating for yourself, for not only the myeloma specialist, but for obviously the best care possible. Not everyone has that opportunity. Not everybody's going to be able to drive 11 hours. I'm still amazed you did that, but
right.
To be able to do it. But we're just thrilled to know that it's had an impact. And I just love how you describe your children, and how you wanted to live for yourself, of course, but to live for them. And sometimes we forget that when we care for patients, we're not just caring for a person, we're caring for a whole of the family. Well, on the subject of family,
yes,
we got Mom here.
Yes.
Yeah, Mama's in the house. So
yes, thanks.
Talk to us a little bit about what it was like to be a care partner to your beautiful daughter here.
Well, I wanted to always be there for her, whatever she needed. So, and going to her appointments and being there, being her second ears and listening to her, watching, keeping an eye on the kids and whatever she needed. I was just there. I'm her mother. I'm going to be there.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah. I got nothing after that. I mean,
right.
That's remarkable. I mean, I love that. Your care for her, and I think you've summarized in so many ways what a care partner is designed to do. That it really becomes about the agenda of the patient, right? To be an extra set of ears. We talk about this with some of our IMF staff. I mentioned earlier Robin and Michael Toohey, who are over at Grace Baptist today. We did a little video together of what it was like, and I love how Robin says, Michael, her husband's the patient, how she says when they go to the appointments, now they got 4 ears instead of 2, and they can hear and take notes and learn, and that becomes really important, because when a patient is going through that journey, it's sometimes hard for you to hear. I mean, even today, we've kind of overloaded you with information, haven't we? And yet, when you're the one who's with the disease and often sick with the disease, it can be hard to take all of that in. So that's wonderful. But also, to care for those other aspects of their life. I think sometimes we get so focused, and we as providers can get so focused on the chemo and the transplant that we forget there are kids whose mouths need to be fed. There are kids who need to be taken to school, who need to be watched over, and this is why it is, of course, such a team sport. Well, Nicole, you tell me, and I can predict your answer, but you tell me what it was like to have your mom giving you that kind of support.
I was able to focus on me, knowing that she was there, she had me. I will tell you, my mother, I'm putting her on here. She goes overboard, meaning she knew that I could not have flowers in the house. She threw every plant away that was in her house because I was about to have my transplant. She ordered containers so that I could have, portion control, a little bit, the things that I needed to eat. She had it ready to go. All you have to do is warm it up, and it was like, here you go. She did not want me to go back and eat something, leftovers. That was not an option. She went overboard. So I so much appreciate her. So like I said, I was in Illinois. She lives in Baltimore. I'm not sure if I said that part. But she opened her house, literally the bedroom. It was, here you go, make sure you're comfortable. If you want to sleep on the couch, bed, wherever, it's your show. So she made sure.
That's wonderful. This is wonderful. Now, but before we wrap up, I want to come back to one point that you had made about, you have this team around you and you have your local oncologist. You've had the access now to two different specialists in Dr. Badros and Dr. Derman. But tell us a little bit about the patient support as well and the resources through patient support groups, through the IMF and the different ways that we've tried to support you through this journey and how that's helped you through this.
So honestly, the IMF, their website, fabulous. I learned so much important information there. That was literally where it started before I even knew anything about IMF, honestly. When you start searching, and you can't look at everything, Google is not everyone's friend, but when you find a good website, IMF, and so I mentioned Becky, Nurse Becky, before. She organizes the Mid-Atlantic Support Group. Right after my transplant, she reached out to me and said, hey, I have a support group. Are you interested? Yes, yes, yes. The support group, believe it or not, there are things that you don't realize that something's happening, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, it's happening to others? Oh, maybe I should talk to my doctor about this. And just the whole interaction. They invite the caregivers there. Now, like I said, I'm in Illinois, so I've been doing Zoom, pandemic, the whole 9 yards. And I do need to find a local one also, but I love Becky. I love my support group for the Mid-Atlantic, so they have been essential.
That's marvelous, because I think sometimes when people hear support group, they kind of have a bit of a stigma view in their mind that it's kind of a group of people who are weak or something like that and need this support from others. It really is about education and indeed support and appreciating, the magnitude of this disease, its impact, and finding the help and the resources from others. And that's obviously what we try to do with the IMF. So I just appreciate the two of you so much. I'm so thankful you're here, and I'm not let you get to go anywhere. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Dr. Usmani to make his way back up. Did we lose Saad? I know he had to step out for a minute, but when we can nab Dr. Usmani, we'll bring him back up, and I think we're going to go into a little bit of a Q&A, but I'm very interested to see if there are individuals here. I know some other questions have come back from Grace Baptist, but if anyone has a question here for what we've covered so far later this morning, especially from our two guests here on the stage. So looks like we've got a question right over here.
Thank you. It's not really a question, but can you clarify for the people in the audience what the NMA is and why it's so important for this group to interact with the NMA? Excellent.
So the question was, or the statement was, who is the NMA? So the NMA is the National Medical Association, which, historically people have thought of as a Black Doctors Association, but it's an organization that is committed to the care of all patients across the country, and in particular, populated by physicians who are deeply committed to health equity in the area. In fact, they have had not only the NMA, but the student NMA has been an incredibly powerful force within the Black and African American communities. And so when we, as the IMF, as I mentioned, one of our, part of the special sauce of Empower is to partner with anybody and everybody who is committed to the better outcomes of patients with myeloma. We knew that the NMA is very much committed to this and has been doing great work in health equity before health equity, as it were, became popular. And they represent so many Black physicians in this country and so many others, in fact, that we knew that they would be a natural partner. It also is wonderful that one of their former presidents, Dr. Edith Mitchell, is on our board at the IMF, and we've worked very closely with her and with the the Cobb Institute, their research arm, and Dr. Morgan works as the head of that research arm. We've worked very closely with him. You know, to us it's been sentinel because it was part of the reason why we had such a beautiful, I think, reaction to this the Medical Student Health Scholar Program, because the student NMA advertised it to medical students across the country. As I mentioned, some from historical Black colleges and universities, but from many places across the country. So it's really, they've been a wonderful partner to us and have led to our relationships now with other organizations, as I mentioned, like the Black Nurses Association and many others. And not only the NMA at FUL at a national level, but the NMA has chapters and branches throughout the whole of the country. So thank you for raising that, and I appreciate that. Other questions? Haley.
I'm actually going to ask one from Grace Baptist.
Please.
If you are a breast cancer survivor, are your risks higher for multiple myeloma?
Maybe I'll let Dr. Rasmani answer that one if you wish. If not, I'm happy to take it too, brother. But
no, I can provide a general answer. So the biggest risk factor for developing any cancer is getting old enough to get it. So the older we get, the more exposures we've had in our lifetimes, and so, you know, typically, you know, most cancers tend to happen later in life, unless, you know, there are certain genetic predispositions, you know, because of family history and ethnicity. If a patient develops one cancer, the chances of developing a second cancer are generally higher than the general population. There is no direct association of having had breast cancer followed by multiple myeloma.
yeah, no, I completely agree. I think we try to wonder sometimes, why is it people get more than one cancer? We heard already with Nicole having had colon cancer, and sometimes we wonder if it happens to be their own inherent genetics just puts them at greater risk. Sometimes we haven't fully appreciated all of the exposures. And sometimes it's what I sometimes call the incidentaloma, meaning that someone is just getting more testing because they have another disease, and some of those markers of myeloma get detected. So there are lots of reasons for that connection. But just because someone has had one cancer, we don't necessarily immediately look for a test for myeloma. We've got a question here.
Yeah,
Yes.
right here. Just to add on to that particular question, Dr. Usmani directed his answer to breast cancer. But what about the bone marrow cancers or the leukemias? If you have that diagnosis, are you more likely to have it morph into a multiple myeloma? And when do both of you think that it might, how long do you think it might take for the liquid or blood biopsies to become part of your world as opposed to only bone marrow biopsies?
Yeah, so I'll start on this one. So great question. So typically we don't see, if you will, a morphing from a leukemia or even a lymphoma to myeloma. They usually kind of respect each other's differences in the sense that they don't, the cancers develop later in the development of those cells, that they usually don't jump from one to another. The exception, if you will, to that may be that leukemia can actually happen after any other blood cancer. So we do have myeloma patients who, unfortunately, partly because of their own genetics, and as Dr. Usmani mentioned, as we get older, but also perhaps from some of their treatment, may develop an MDS or myelodysplastic syndrome, as we described earlier, or leukemia later on in their disease course. It's something we watch carefully for. There are some patients, by the way, who they both coexist. I did a study back when I was a myeloma fellow when, you know, Saad wasn't born yet, where we looked at this, where we actually went back to the bone marrows when people had their diagnosis of myeloma and looked really, really carefully. And sometimes people can have some changes consistent with the leukemia, even at their diagnosis of myeloma. But it's unusual, if you will, from one to jump to the other. As for your second question, maybe I'll turn that to you, Saad. You know, when are we going to be moving away from doing more bone marrows, and can we do it all in the blood? And I know you and I were just in a meeting in Germany last week where we talked about this for a couple hours, so I'm happy to let you try and answer that.
No, certainly. I think, you know, for certain cancers, it's an easier way to monitor and follow the disease course in the peripheral blood. You know, the challenge with multiple myeloma in general is plasma cells really like to live inside the bone marrow. They don't typically like to circulate in the bloodstream. And the ones that circulate in the bloodstream are the more, aggressive phenotypes. So they start getting independence from that bone marrow microenvironment influence, or, the bone marrow neighborhood influence. The bottom line is that we will have those kind of blood tests available for prognostication, but there are some inherent challenges on how much information do you truly get. Besides the cancer cells, there's another test, which can actually, it's called mass spectrometry, which actually measures the protein that the myeloma cells make, and it is 1,000 times more sensitive than the assays that we typically use now. And that particular assay, I think, will enable us to take a better look at the clonal protein being produced by myeloma cells, and that test actually may reduce the amount of bone marrow biopsies we do, in the future. I think that, so those are two separate things. One, can the peripheral blood cancer cell detection help? Maybe, but I think the protein detection will probably be the more practical solution for us.
Yeah, or maybe even doing both. And that's part of the work we do in my lab in Arizona, where we're trying to detect even one plasma cell in 10 million other cells, because I'm sure Nicole can attest to this. If I came to you and said, yeah, we don't have to do another bone marrow test, you'd be like, amen, right? Because it's not major surgery per se, but it does require putting a needle in the backside where needles don't belong. And so it can be quite uncomfortable for patients, as I'm sure you can attest to.
Yes.
Yes, so that,
Yes.
that would be a blood test, absolutely. I think we got a question over here.
Yes, it's about the clinical trials. To what extent can IMF help to make sure that clinical trials are equally available at different centers? Because I know one facility may have maybe 2 trials running, and if I'm a patient there, those 2 may be offered, or if I qualify. But the ones at a neighboring facility may not be offered. I mean, I lost a brother less than 2 years ago to myeloma, and we encountered a situation where we were with a specialist, okay, but there were not many trials. There were trials elsewhere. But I think the sentiment towards our going to the other places was not very positive. So what can be done to ensure that maybe on IMF site to have a link to all the trials? Of course, we know we can get that elsewhere. But it's a dilemma that we faced, and I'd like you to address it if possible.
Yeah, thank you for, I'm very sorry to hear about your brother, but I do appreciate your passion around it and raising this issue, because it is very, very important. I mean, I think we all recognize it would be impossible to have every trial at every site, but there are lots of strategies that we as the IMF are pursuing, and we're pursuing in concert with others to increase access to it. And Diana and I were talking about this the other day, and sort of I'm working through this 10-point plan that we've created to try and improve that. I won't go through all of the points, but part of it has to do with much greater information being provided to patients. We are now working on, with our digital strategy at the IMF, of being able to have things much more accessible so that people can learn a lot more about what clinical trials are available to them. Because there are some search engines now that aren't so easy to use, to be honest. So we want to make it a lot more easy, so at least we know where the sites are. But at the same time, improving those sites as we work with our industry partners to say, with all due respect even to MSK, Memorial Sloan Kettering, and where I used to work at Mayo Clinic and where I work at City of Hope, some of these big centers often have a lot of the trials, but are we looking at smaller centers? Are we looking at more remote places in Louisiana, in Alabama, in Mississippi? Are we looking at, there's a whole new trend of now what's called decentralized trials, where a place can have a clinical trial at their main site, and I know this is some of the work that MSK is doing here in New York, for example, where they have their hub here in the Upper East Side, but then being able to say, you know what, we can have satellite sites out in the Bronx or in Brooklyn or in other places. And that is happening. I mean, one of my dear colleagues works in the University of Miami, and they found that it was very hard for a lot of their patients in that region in south of Miami to be able to access clinical trials. So they've established, not all of them, but many of their trials in smaller centers, which has allowed a community that otherwise wouldn't have had access. Many Hispanic patients that would otherwise not been able to make it into the main city have been able to have access. So there's a whole series of things. I can tell you unequivocally that I'm very passionate about this because I have seen the benefit of clinical trials in my patients, and it hurts me to know that many people don't have that kind of access. I don't know, Saad, if you have more to add to that.
No, absolutely. I think that there's a big effort, to push our pharma partners to have a more diverse site selection. Even at the big centers, we don't have all the clinical trials available. And even the big centers, I think myeloma, the myeloma research community is a very collegial, cohesive group of very nice people. So there are, trials that might be available at Mount Sinai. So I can give you an example. One of our patients went to Sinai for a clinical trial because that trial was not yet open at our center. And my Sinai colleagues sent us a patient who required a different treatment on a clinical trial, and that trial was not available there. So we always have, we look out for the patient's best interest and whatever options we have, and we don't have an issue reaching out to each other to try to get, the clinical trials to patients. So even in well-resourced programs like Sinai and MSK, we don't have all the trials available and rely on each other. So you can only imagine, for smaller centers that do not have that much staff and capabilities, how difficult it would be for them to, open those clinical trials. But these issues are system-wide, and we're really pushing our pharma partners to do a better job.
And even at the regulatory level of ensuring that there are barriers that are withdrawn, whether even, as I said, the financial ones and others, to make sure that happens. And just as a reminder too, because we heard this already from Nicole as well, that sometimes when a patient comes to me for I know sometimes people use the word second opinion. I tend to prefer the phrase expert opinion because second sounds like the first one is wrong. And sometimes they come to me and they're like, Dr. Joe, I feel like I'm cheating on my doctor by coming to see you today, And we reassure them that you're not, And not everybody always has the greatest experience with each center, and it's okay sometimes to change. But I liked how you said that, Saad, because I think it is really important that we look at that partnership. I've been doing expert opinion consults in myeloma from patients all over the world coming to see me for over 20 years now, and it's inordinately rare that it ever caused friction from the home doctor. If anything, we love knowing that our patients are getting a deeper opinion and more opportunity. I know we have another minute or two before we wrap up here. Are there any there's a question up here. Did we have a mic here?
I can bring it over, and this is the last question.
Yeah, Haley's keeping me to time. Yes. Yeah.
Here you go, Ada.
I came in a little bit late, so I don't know if you explained ages that myeloma can affect people of color.
Yes, so I'll quit. We mentioned earlier, but I think it's really important to mention this, and maybe a good ending piece as well. So the spectrum of myeloma is broad. Myeloma, generally speaking, is a disease of older individuals. But just last week, I'm being asked, I got a call from one of our local oncologists in Phoenix who just diagnosed myeloma in a 19-year-old and wants me to see that individual. I once flew to Uruguay to meet what we think may be the youngest patient ever diagnosed with myeloma. It was an 8-year-old boy. Now, that's incredibly rare. There have been 2 people under the age of 10 ever diagnosed with myeloma, at least that we know of. The average age of myeloma diagnosis is somewhere between 69 and 70. In African American individuals, it's younger at about 65 to 66. And in Hispanic individuals, it's even a little bit younger, 64 to 65. I always remind people, that's an average, right? Like on average, trying to take a taxi from here to JFK is an hour and 5 minutes, but it could be 4 hours, right? Exactly. I'm being optimistic in my average, but and so it really varies, and so people sadly can be diagnosed very young or very old. One of the reasons why we talk about the age is that we want to ensure that primary care providers, almost independent of age, have myeloma on their mind. when someone has any of the signs and symptoms that we've talked today about myeloma. Well, I have just a couple of closing comments, but I just want to thank the panel again. Thank you so much for being here. In particular, to see a mother-daughter combination touches my soul today. I just appreciate the two of you being here, and thank you, Saad, as well, for your expertise. Thank you.